Let me ask you a question to start with. And there's no right or wrong answer to this question, but it's sort of what pops into your head. So, as we have been going through this, we're 16, 17, 18 lessons into our series of miracles. And there's some more still left to come as well. But if somebody were to approach you, walked up on the street maybe, or maybe you were on a game show and this was a question, how would you answer? If the question was, what was one of the miracles that Jesus performed? What do you think would be the first one to pop into your head? Now, my first day back to school was today. Didn't have students, but I had to work. So I'm going to go into teacher mode for just a second. I want you to turn to the person that's sitting beside you. I want you to tell that person what would pop into your head and let them tell you what they think would pop into their head. The first one that pops into your head, the one that, tell me a miracle Jesus performed, you just, whichever one comes to mind. All right. Now, saw some people talking, okay? Nobody slapped each other, so I guess we all agreed with what the answer was right there. Hopefully you got it right. Again, there's no wrong answer, but just out of curiosity, what was your answer? Well, share with us. You can, Connie. Changing the water wine, other way around. So it would have lost some of its luster, I think, if it went from here's some more water, it's be good. All right, that's definitely that was one. All right, what else? How many of you had that as your answer? Okay, so several of us. So it's a different answer. You didn't think about that one. Say it again. Okay. Man, that would not have been on my list, I don't think. Tom. Oh, it's the first sermon Ben ever preached. That makes a lot more sense than now. Tom. Man, they let down through the roof. I didn't have that one I kind of did this but that's certainly something that sticks in your head, right? That's something that, there's a sort of a logistical, architectural thing that's involved with that. Anybody else? Jesus feeding the 5,000. That's probably one that a lot would have. Peter's mother-in-law. Okay. Raising Jairus. So I asked this for a reason, because I kind of played this game myself. But there's no right or wrong answer. But I think a lot of times the stories that resonate with us are the ones that maybe make a connection to us. And for whatever reason, it might be something like Boo's example makes sense when you have a child that's passed away as well, that makes sense. But also, if you, like with Tom's, if you were somebody who built houses your whole life, something like that would maybe make sense to you as well. Ben's made sense. When Ben said it, a lot of y'all looked at Ben like, I don't know. But it makes sense. That's the first sermon Ben preached. He's going to remember. I don't remember the first time I preached it at all. 3 minutes later, I'd say everybody else had forgotten it as well. But nonetheless, we all have sort of our reasons. I wrote down mine. The four that I had. First was turning water to wine. That was the first one that sort of, I think that, I don't know which one of these comes first, but that's it, I guess, in order. Feeding the 5,000, that's one. I think Jesus walking on the water was one. And then raising Lazarus. Those were my four. I don't know why they're my four, but those are the four that sort of stuck with me. But the point of this is that we have all of these different lessons, and I think in many ways, we've talked about this before, how that the Bible is not a singular book, but is a gathering and a collection of writings of a lot of different books. But even those writings are collections of things inside of the book. And just like if you're reading a book at home, you might have liked chapter 4 better than chapter 5. Well, there may be a story that catches your attention more in Matthew rather than Mark. Well, tonight we're going to get the very rare situation of a story that is recorded in all four Gospels. Tonight we're going to be talking about the 5,000 fed. That's the title that we're giving it, although we will adjust a little bit about that here as well. But most of the time that we've been covering these classes that we've been covering these topics, I've told you to turn, it seems like it's always Mark, but we went to Mark or we went to Matthew or wherever it might be. Tonight I'm going to tell you the rare thing. You do not have to have your Bible tonight. I have a Bible for you tonight. We are going to read the story of the 5,000 fed, but we are going to read it as a combination of all four books. And the point being is we're going to read a verse out of Mark and then a verse out of Luke and then another one out of Mark. But we're going to see sort of the whole story told through what happens here within this. And so we'll look at it from this way. Now, obviously, you can read four versions of this if you wanted to. You could go to Matthew and do it. You can go to Mark and do it, and whatever else, whichever else you might want to go to. But I thought this would be maybe a little something different for how we're going to approach it. I am not to say that you don't have to have your Bible out necessarily, but I'm just saying that I've got a version for you here. I think I got enough copies too. I'm sorry? No, this is from me. This is me combining it. It's not from the book of Daniel. That's something different, though. So, all right, enough for everybody right there. So this is yours. You can write on it. You can draw on it. You can pass notes to each other on the back of it. Teacher's stupid. Whatever you want to write on it. It's all good right there. But we're talking tonight. This is our 17th lesson, and this is the 5,000 fed. And so just a few things about this. I think next week I don't think we're breaking much new ground in these. These are lessons that we're probably fairly familiar with in and of ourselves. But I do want us to hit on a couple of things right here. This is the one, the only miracle recorded by all four gospel writers. Now, I do have a little anecdote here, or a little story, drop down. The incident regarding Malchus's ear is in all, but only Luke tells of sort of Luke's the only one that gives like the end of the story about Jesus, reattaching it to the man's ear. So that's there, but it's not like this one is. The second thing, according to Mark and Luke, the disciples had just returned from the mission upon which Jesus had sent them. Now, the reason that I had Tom read what he did there, Mark chapter 6, verses 7 through 13, was quite literally that. That's where they had been. And I want us to actually, this is a bad job of teaching. I do want you to look back at Mark chapter 6 real quick. And it's not on your paper right there, because I want to look for just a second at what Tom read for us. So Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 7. And again, we read, this was our scripture reading just a second ago. There's an almost exact account in Luke chapter 9, verses 6 through 10-ish as well. But let's look at this, Mark chapter 6. So in verse 7, he says, he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out two by two and gave them power over unclean spirits. He committed them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals and not put on two tunics. We'll look at what Jesus says in verse 10 here in a second, but I want to look at these first verses. To start with, when we read in verse 7, and he called the 12 to himself. Who are the 12? These are the apostles. And so Jesus has a while back sort of purposefully chosen these people to be his sort of primary followers. We sometimes conflate the term apostle and disciple. The apostles were disciples. The disciples were not apostles. We'll put it that way. A disciple is anyone. The apostles' task was a little bit more in-depth than that. So he sends these out. It says that he sent. So I want you to think about that for a second. What would be of sending the apostles out as a group of two? Okay. So this just gives Ben said, according to the law, he had two people that would give an account or would be could serve as a witness. I guess that's the best way to maybe say that. What else? Comfort, okay. Safety, okay. Sure. Right. So all of those answers are good. They're all there. So Jesus has sent these folks out. And again, they said, well, they went two as groups of two. Not only then, let's go to verse 8, which we read there just a second ago. Some of the stipulations that Jesus put on them, which is a very, if I can use the word Spartan trip for them. Verse 8, he commanded them to take nothing on the journey except a staff. What's a staff? Just a big stick, a little cane to walk with, which would allow you, some protection, I guess, if need be. But that's about it. There you go. That's why Ben's in here. But that's something that I get why they would take it. But I do want to look at the rest of verse 8 because it says, no bag, no bread, no copper in your money belts. Now, how many of us either going to vacation, going to work, going to town, any of these, how many of us look at verse 8 and think, wow, ladies, no purse, no suitcase if we're thinking about going on a trip, no money in your, we would say no money in your pocket, with the debit card, the credit card doesn't go. What are they taking with them? The clothes on their back, and that's it. How many of you feel like that's not enough to go out and do this task? Probably all of us, right? It feels like, I would want to take a few more things with me. But he said, wear sandals and not to even put on what? Not even 2 tunics. Like you're literally going with just as the minimalist amount of stuff that you can have. Okay? Now, before we go further, why do you think Jesus sent them with such a limited amount of stuff? Yeah, I think so. How many of you, I feel like I've said that a lot already, when you go on a trip somewhere, we're going to go on vacation, we're going to be gone for a week, 2, 3, 4 suitcases. Like, think about that. I'm going to be gone for 7 days, but the only safe thing for me to do is take 28 pair of underwear, right? I mean, you know how it works, right? You just never know. I'm going to take these pants that I've taken every year. You're going to Hawaii. Yeah, but sometimes it gets cold, right? I got to have these thermal pants just in case. Why do we get like that? Why do we do that? We want to be prepared. I mean, we're going to be long ways. I've heard they've not built any stores anywhere except right here that I could get if I needed. But we do that, right? We spend, man, I tell you what, we got ready for Vegas. It took us forever to pack. We're focused on all that stuff, right? And it's like, oh yeah, we went to, we had a good trip. Grand Canyon, it's fine. It's a hole in the ground. But we had all the stuff, I'm sorry, Connie, but the point of this is that we start thinking about all this other stuff and we kind of bog ourselves down with that. But Jesus said, don't take any of that, because their point for the church, what were they going to do? They're going to preach, and they're not going forever. They're not going, this is not you'll be back in 7 years kind of a thing. This is sort of the first trip out for the whole group. It's like the field trip, as it were. Is you go out there, you're going to go out and preach, you'll see how it works and comes back. But he also gives some words of advice. I think we start in verse 10. He said to them, verses 10 and 11 should be in red. He said, whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from that place. Whoever will not receive you nor hear you, when you depart from them, do what? This is good advice for people who are going out to, I know they've all sort of preached and taught a little, but this is the first time they're really going. And Jesus is telling them what people need to hear from the get-go. He said, if they don't want to hear you, what do? You move on. Why is that hard for us? We take it personal. That affects us. That was, I was in a training session today, and that's what the guy, he was talking about that. He said, he was talking about like how when you talk with folks about the school or whatever, if they say one thing bad about the school, it's like, oh, you're offending me. Like this is, but we take things personal. What Jesus is saying to them is, if you go to so-and-so's house and they're not interested, you can sit there and fuss and fight for the next 10 years with them. Or you can do what? What if the neighbor's been waiting on you forever and you've never went there because you're still over here fussing and fighting? He says, shake the dust off your feet, move on, just go on a little bit further. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's what we see then in the back end of verse 11. He says, assuredly, I say to you, to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. And what he's saying there is, if they say no to you, you move on to the next one. That's fine. They'll have to, you're not going to be responsible for whether they said yes or no to you. They got to deal with that. Yes. Yeah. Verses 12 and 13 then says they went out and preached that the people should repent. They cast out demons, anointed them with oil, were sick and healed them. That's where we're going to start tonight then. They have all these apostles are coming back to Jesus. And so what we've seen here is, for a brief period of time, the apostles have been gone. I don't know what Jesus was necessarily doing during this time period, but it seems like business slows down maybe a little bit right here, but it's going to pick right back up. And so what we're going to see here tonight, we'll see here. Mark continues on by stating that they tell him to go out into the, let's see, this is what we're going to talk about here tonight. And so Mark says that Jesus bid the disciples to go to a desert place where they might rest and eat apart from the crowds. And we've seen this where where they've sort of went away a little bit. I have a map here that I saw this, that they're going to go. This is typically where it has been said, but some research says that perhaps it was on the other side of the river. That doesn't really matter, but we're on the north side of the Sea of Galilee right here. But what happens is when they get in a boat, and we'll see this here in a minute, they go over here to this spot. The people just said, we're just going to go as well. And so they just take off running. And the Bible says that the people who walked got there faster than we've all said that too. We got there quicker if we'd walked rather than driving in this traffic or something like that. And so the people saw him leave. And so this is how desperate they were for what Jesus and the apostles were teaching, was that even when Jesus was trying to sort of get away for a moment, they're still pursuing, they're still going after it. They're still trying to figure out what it is, what they could do. They followed because the miracles Jesus performed, they'd seen all of this. By this point, we're well along the way here. We've seen people healed and all that. They wanted to see that sort of thing happen as well. And so Jesus taught many things to the people about the kingdom of God and healed those in need. But I pointed this right here. This is not super relevant other than just to know that there's a large group of people that are now away from home. And it's nighttime-ish, getting dark right now. Go ahead. Right. I don't know, it's probably not that far, but I'd say it's probably 10 or so. But nonetheless, it's from Stanford to Lancaster. I'm sure that they went to be able to see that. And so we're going to look at that here this evening. Any other thoughts about sort of where we are before we go further? So you have your paper. And so what I would like to do is we're just going to go through this, and we're going to read these sort of one at a time, if it were. So I want to ask you real quick, because I want you to be comfortable with it, but I would like to get people to help me with the reading here. So just one each, if possible. Who would like to be the first one, which is Mark 6 and 32? You can raise your hand. Connie, I saw your hand first. What about the second one then? Luke 9 and 10. Jimmy, you look like you're bidding at an auction, but you don't really want to buy right there. That hand's going up there quick. Mark 6 and 33. Tony? Okay. John 6 and 2. Mel? Okay. Mark 6, 34. Deb? Mark 6, 35 and 36. Annette? John 6, 5 and 6. So Leland, sorry, Debbie. You want the next one, Debbie? John 6 and verse 7. Okay. John 6, verses 8 and 9. Lucille. All right. Mark 6, 39 and 40. Ben, do I see your hand? Mark 6 and 41. Tom? Mark 6, 42 and 43. Jill? Now he's bidding for you. Matthew 14 and verse 21. Maria? All right. Some of y'all are real good at pointing out other people. Like, yeah, he wants to do it. Yeah, she definitely wants to. John 6 and verse 14. Boom. Okay. I think I've got everybody. If you got a pen or pencil, maybe put a check mark by the one you had there as we go through. If you can remember it, it's pretty good. But I wanted to get as many people involved. These will be up here on the screen here as we go. But this will tell the story of what we're going to be looking at here. We have our picture for tonight is old 1433. This is from the, what's the word here? Matinadaran Museum of Manuscripts in Yerevan, Armenia. This is a manuscript is a written document, but you're going to ask me which one you got. Lucille, John 6, verses 8 and 9. All right. So we're going to read through this. We won't read the whole thing at one time, but rather we'll sort of go with it and ask a few questions. Again, this is found in all four Gospels. There's a Matthew, there's a Mark, there's a Luke, and there's a John version of all of this. And so I've sort of picked and plucked different verses here to make this work. So Connie, Mark 6 and verse 32, please, dear. And Jimmy, Luke 9 and 10. Okay, so what Tom read there at the start was they had went out. Well, now they're coming back. So let's think about if you are Jesus in this point. You've sent the 12 apostles out. You've gave them a task that they're supposed to do. What do you think Jesus wants to do when these 12 people come back? Yeah, you were going to debrief a little bit. How did it go? What did you find out? Ask some questions. What worked? What didn't work? What did the people what were they interested in? All the kind of stuff that you would have after any kind of meeting or whatever it might would be. Why would Jesus want to have these conversations with the apostles, would you think? Absolutely. And you've got people that went to different places. And a lot of times what's really beneficial to me is if I went over here, but Jimmy, you went over there, when Jimmy tells his story, which I was not a part of at all, I can learn from what Jimmy said. Okay. And then when Kelly tells me his part, it's like, okay, well, I got that. But I didn't deal with Kelly, but I know what that may be. And so we all sort of can do the same type of thing. So Jesus is clearly wanting to have a few moments to sort of break this down. The problem is, yes. Yeah. Right. Right. Yep. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure this was probably nervous for them. Because first of all, they were chosen by Jesus, which puts a little pressure on them. They've already seen what Jesus has done. Think about all the miracles we've seen in this class. He's obviously going to be better than they are, but there's a little pressure on them to go out and say this as well. So he takes the disciples that we read that they're just saying to them to a deserted place by boat. And deserted here, we're just trying to get away, go somewhere where there maybe are not a whole lot of people. It's near the city of Bethsaida. All right, so let's go a little further. This is Mark 6:30. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Right. That's true. Right. If you didn't hear that, Dad said that Judas was somebody who went on that. He went and did the work as well. All right. We've got three of them right here. Tony, this is Mark 6:33, just your part. All right, Melvina, you're John chapter 6 and verse 2. Okay, Mom, you're the last part. All right. So we see here, we already mentioned this already, but what do the people do when they see Jesus and the apostles go to point B, as it were, to sort of have this meeting? They follow. They saw them leave, and they took off, and they said, we're going to the same place right there. So why? And this is from John 6 and verse 2. There's a literal answer from what Melvina read. What was their reasoning for going? We read there what Melvina read, said, because they saw his signs, which he performed on those who were diseased. And that tells me that there were people in that crowd who had ailments that they were hoping to get fixed. And there were also people in that crowd who were totally fine, but they kind of wanted to see some ailments be fixed on some people as well. And so all of these people are going because they trusted, they felt like, we're going to see, what we see last week. They said, we've not seen anything like this in Israel before. So Jesus compared the people who followed him to what? How does he compare them in Mark 6:34? Sheep, but not just sheep, but sheep with what? What did you say, Lucille? Sheep without a shepherd. Okay? Now, I don't know a whole lot about sheep, but I feel like if you read anything in the Bible, you kind of learn a little bit about sheep, even if you don't. But what's the job of the shepherd when it comes to the sheep? Leading them, okay? And it seems to me, if we can infer from our reading here that if the shepherd takes the night off, what's going to happen to the sheep? They're going to go anywhere. I mean, you might have had 50 to start with, but the odds are you're not going to have 50 when you finish up, right? Why are the sheep going to go here and there and everywhere? They're going to follow their nose, wherever hunger takes them, wherever interest takes them. And there's nobody holding that staff with the hook on to pull that neck back and get them back in line. Because when you pull them back in line, what do? They'll go right wherever it is that you need them. But if you let them roam, you're going to be gone forever. But Jesus said to these people, he said, they are interested, maybe we would say, but they're lacking what? They're lacking some kind of leadership. Where is that leadership going to come from? Jesus to start with, but then where? The apostles. These same people that have went out, as Boo said a minute ago, this limited commission, these same people that have been teaching. They are going to be able to trust that there's another person that I guess you could lead them as well. When Mike Johnson comes here in a few weeks for gospel meeting, one of the lessons is Jesus the Good Shepherd. And that's a term that's used quite often as well. But Jesus's job here is going to be sort of guide these folks. Because if you don't give them guidance, what will happen? They're going to scatter to the wind. Questions? Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go a little further. And this is Mark chapter 6, verses 35 and 36. All right. And then Leland, John 6, verses 5 and 6. Yeah, John 6, verses 5 and 6. No, I won't believe. So I got to apologize. my copies, it was printed in red but then on your paper, it's printed in not there, I think, right there. But it says, he says to Philip, we'll come back to that in a second, but he says, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? I find this interesting because not so much what Leland read, but let's go back to what Annette read. Because what Annette says, remember, this is just shortly after Jesus had asked, remember when the woman touched his cloth and Jesus said, who touched me? And how did the apostles respond to that? They kind of laughed almost. There's a million people here. Who touched you? But Jesus knew. Well, then right here we see something similar in Mark chapter 6. So let's look at the first question. Yeah. Right. Almost immediately. So the disciples, when evening comes, you can see the question on the board. The disciples wanted Jesus to do what? He said, we send them away for what reason? He said, so they can get something. He said, they're essentially saying, there's a whole lot of people here. We don't have any food. They're 10 miles from home, wherever it is, and that's if they lived right there. They need to go away and get something to eat. Okay. Now, is this an understandable thought, I think, from the disciples? What does Jesus say to Philip then? But Ben kind of answered the same. What does he say to Philip then in John 5 or John 6, verse 5 and 6? And why does he say it? Where shall we buy bread? Now, this is one of those questions that you're not necessarily looking for an answer, right? I don't know if this is exactly a rhetorical question, but it kind of is. He says, where shall we buy bread? But what's Jesus really doing right here? He's testing them, okay? What's their answer going to be? Well, there's a store around the back, Well, there's no stores around it. Well, if we rowed a boat over here, and I'm not familiar with this part of town, all these kind of things. Right? But he's testing Philip. What do you think his hopeful answer would be? God will provide. Philip answers this a whole lot like we would probably answer as well. Let's go a little further then. Debbie, John chapter 6, just verse 7. Now, verses 8 and 9, Lucille. All right. So Philip and Andrew both give a response that we can everyone relate to. First one, Jesus had asked Philip, he said, where shall we buy bread? Testing him. And Philip responds, how? In verse 7. Yep. Absolutely. 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for him. So he said, if we have 200 denarii, now this little point up here, it's sometimes translated a penny, a shilling, a denarii. Don't worry about that. It was worth roughly 17 cents, but it was a day's wage at the time. And he's saying if we had 200 of them, which basically, if we had two-thirds a year's worth of salary, we wouldn't be able to feed all these people anyway. Is that the answer Jesus was looking for? Not really. But why do you think he gave that answer? It's a practical answer. It's a common sense answer. You've told your kids this before. I would like to buy this for you, but we don't really have the money for this right now. Well, Philip's answer sort of makes a lot of sense. Well, you can see the wheels turning a little bit. What does Andrew say to Jesus in John chapter 6 and verse 8? He gives an accounting of sort of what we got. So we've got a kid here that's got what? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. All right, so you got 5 loaves of bread and you got a couple fish. That's not going to be enough, right? I mean, it's nice. We appreciate your offer, but that's several thousand people here, right? So we've got a sort of a financial answer. We've got a sort of logistical or practical answer, but nobody has answered this how. No spiritual answer. not what Ben was saying a minute ago. Nobody has just referred back to what you literally told us to go out, teach and preach, and you said, don't take any money, don't take any food, don't take a shirt, take a staff, go do it and come back. And they've already forgotten that, right? Maybe it's because they haven't had the good meeting yet that they were going to have. Maybe they should have been able to have that first. I don't know. But they've sort of forgotten that. Thoughts on it before we go any further? Because Jesus will sort of just take charge here after that. Absolutely. 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 This is it. You're exactly right. And so the point of this is to show that I wanted you to see that. I wanted you to think about that because Philip and Andrew answered this the same way that most of us would have thought about this as well. We think about things in a very practical sense. And if somebody doesn't think about it in a practical sense, we sometimes look at them and think, you're crazy, right? What? $5,000 men. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, you just said the Bible said there was 12,000 men, but it's 5,000. Yeah. 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 Sure. Absolutely. Let's just go a little further. We're getting a little tight on our time here. But Ben, Mark chapter 6, Ben, just verses 39 and 40. Okay. Tom, just verse 41. Okay. And Jill, 42 and 43. So all of these, this all sort of came, this is from Mark chapter 6, but we see Jesus' answer, which is a lot different than Peter and Andrew's answer right there. So the first thing, because Jesus has a practical mind here too. He said, what does Jesus command the disciples in Mark 6, verses 39 and 40? He said to set them down, and they sit down in ranks. It said in hundreds and in 50s. This is sort of dividing each other off right there, okay? And so you can, I think this would have made it seem like even more people. But sometimes when we see things sort of broken down, it makes a little more sense rather than just this massive thing. But he said, we're going to divide them up. We got them into groups. We got a group here, and we got a group here, and we got a group here. And so Jesus is, this is step one in this miracle. Now, second thing, Mark 6 and verse 41, what did Jesus do before he gives any of this food out? He blesses it, okay? Now, I don't know if he would have had to have done this, but what's the point of doing this? Okay, be thankful for what you've got, even if you don't have a whole lot. But who's going to see him do this as well? Everybody's going to see him. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be able to do miracles. That's not what it means. But it's say like, Jesus, instead of being sort of the heroes, like just slinging bread out to everybody and it just keeps coming. And everybody can sort of see this is what we got. We're going to work here with what we have. Now, at the end, we read that the people fed, the people have ate, and it says what? How much was left over? Full of fragments and of the fish. I cannot explain this, comprehend this, wrap my head around this, and I don't necessarily request that you do either. But I wanted us to look at Philip and Andrew's answers to Jesus first, because Philip and Andrew responded in a very practical manner. There's not enough food. There's not enough people. We look at the response of this, verse 42 and verse 43, and say, that's impractical as well. I can see Jesus doing this miracle that provides enough food for everybody, but I can't comprehend leftovers, right? That's a little hard for me to understand. I can get that, it's just everybody just had enough for them to eat, but leftovers, that's a little too much. Maybe that's a little hard for me to be able to grasp. Yeah. Yeah, who knows about that? But so, yeah, that's right. We got some folks in here know what do with leftovers. I know I know that right there. But the point of this is to show is that we went from sort of a practical approach to a Jesus approach to it takes us 2 verses to start thinking, well, I don't see how that worked out. I bet Philip and Andrew probably thought the same thing. It was like, how is there so much left right here? Sure. I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah. Right. There's probably some truth to that. Let's finish up here. Maria, Matthew 14 and verse 21. Okay, and then Boo, the last one. Okay. So I wanted to finish with a couple things because Matthew gives a good description of how many people there were. But what do we read in Matthew 14 and 21? How many people were present? This story has sort of taken on a lot of these, there's different titles. This is one that's sort of taken on the title Feeding the 5,000. But the number was bigger than that. And I don't think that doesn't matter. To me, if it's 5 or 6 or 10 or 20, there's a limitation of God that doesn't really matter one way or the other. But the point of this is to show this is a big number. It's not a 4 people. If we had, tonight, if we had 2 fish and 5 loaves, we could make that work in here. We wouldn't get very much, but we can make that work. But 5,000 people, that's an impractical thing. If I took 5 loaves and 2 fishes to Lincoln County High School tomorrow, that's not going to work, right? It just doesn't work right there. But the point to me of the number is just to show that this is an overwhelming amount of people that they were still working for. Now, their response in John 6 and verse 14 is not unlike the response to Jesus healing the woman with the issue of blood from last week. What Boo read there, what did those that had seen that, what did they say? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Elijah? Yeah, Elijah. But yeah, the point holds. Still, again, that would have been a story that the woman who sort of kept, they kept making and kept making. This is truly the prophet who has come into the world. And then for all of us, and my starting question was, what miracle resonates with you? For all of us, there's something that sticks with us. There's something somewhere that made you become a Christian. And it probably wasn't the first sermon you heard. It may not have been a sermon at all. But there's something that sort of caught you. And I don't know if you're seeing this, but these miracles, there's something that's catching people at the end of every one. There's like a quote where there's a reaction from the people. All of them are there. And this is one, it says that this truly the prophet who has come to the world. Last week we've not seen anything like this in all of Israel. There's all these different responses that people have. So what can we take from this? Well, to start with, Jesus is compassionate, right? And Jesus, at the start of this, Jesus' whole goal is to take the apostles to a sort of private place and break down what they've done for the last few days. That was the goal of the meeting. Did that happen? It may have happened later, but that's not what, Jesus showed compassion on the group. His priority was on who? The people. Even though his real priority was having this meeting. But sometimes things sort of supersede. When I was assistant principal, the principal told me one time, he said, write 10 things down every day that you plan to do. And he said, you'll probably get about 5 of them done. Because what's going to happen is other things are going to come up, other things are going to happen, and you got to deal with those. And sometimes we get sort of locked in. I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. I can't help you right now. What if Jesus had said to those people, can't help you right now? Wouldn't have worked, right? Sometimes Jesus will use you to help others. I want you to, I had never thought about it. I read this weekend. I want you to think about it. How popular do you think the little boy was when it's all said and done? I had never thought about that before. I read that somewhere that the apostles said, we don't have anything. And they said, well, hey, you got this guy. He ain't got a whole lot, a little kid here. He's got a little bit of this and that. When he went, I'm guessing what he had was probably enough for him. I don't know how old he was, but the way the Bible uses the word lad, I think he's like probably Will's age or something like that. Well, you'd have to have 10 fish and 50 loaves to feed Will. And he probably thought, well, this is enough for me. And boy, none of these other people have food, but I'm glad that I brought it, right? But I know he didn't have much. He could have shared with the person beside him, right or left. But no way could he. But he sort of is the star of the show, as it were, right? And so he was able to help others. You know, there's probably people that said, boy, if you hadn't had that, I don't know what could have happened. Well, sometimes we can be that as well, right? Jesus can use us to help us. Sometimes a simple act by us makes a big difference in the life of somebody else, right? Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because the last thing here, it was too big for them, and Philip and Andrew told you so. But it was not too big for God. Matthew chapter 6, 25 through 27, Jesus said not to be anxious about your life, right? Not what you're going to eat, or what you're going to drink, clothes you're going to wear, or whatever that may be. But we get worried about those things, right? We fret and concern ourselves and worry about those kinds of things. And sometimes at the expense of other things that we maybe could be doing as well. And so it's too big for us, but only because we sometimes forget that God's in our corner behind us. There's a big difference in that. Any lessons or comments on the lesson before we wrap up? Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Anyone else? Thanks so much for that. We'll walk on water next week. I'll try to bring a pool in, and we'll see if we can do it or not. So wear your swimsuits there. You know, Lucille, I know you like to get in the water and pool anyway, so we'll let you go first right there. So.